a lion cub appeared, begging at the window. And when the woman allowed it inside, something unimaginable took place. Beyond the small research station's windows, the Namibian desert extended without end, its rust-colored dunes turning to gold beneath the late afternoon light. Dr. Olivia Harlow tucked a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear as her attention remained fixed on the satellite imagery displayed across her laptop screen, carefully tracking the movement patterns of the desert-adapted lion pride she had devoted the past 18 months to studying. Her involvement with the Desert Lion Conservation Project had led her to this distant outpost along the edge of the Skeleton Coast, a severe, merciless terrain where a small lion population had learned to endure within one of Earth's most punishing environments. Unlike their savanna relatives, these desert specialists could survive days without water, journeyed enormous distances in pursuit of prey, and had devised unusual hunting strategies aimed at uncommon food sources like seals and cormorants found along the shoreline. Olivia's present focus centered on a particular pride that had recently suffered the loss of its dominant male at the hands of poachers. The lionesses and cubs remaining were exhibiting strange movement trends, approaching human communities dangerously near in their urgent search for food. This created conditions ripe for human-wildlife conflict that could bring catastrophe upon the desert lion population, already perched on the edge of extinction. The sudden wind brought a swirl of dust through the station's screened window, momentarily hiding her view of the desert. This dry season had been especially unforgiving, with water supplies dropping to dangerously low levels. Even the resilient oryx and springbok were suffering, which meant the lions were suffering as well. A quiet vibration from her satellite phone captured Olivia's attention. A message from Thomas, her research partner, who had journeyed to the closest town for supplies 3 days earlier. Road washed out by flash flood. Stuck at CES Fontaine until the repair team shows up. Minimum 3 days, adequate supplies. Olivia exhaled slowly. Flash floods brought a strange contradiction to the desert. Infrequent yet destructive when they materialized, able to turn dry river channels into violent currents within moments, only to vanish just as abruptly, leaving ruined roads and bridges behind. Enough for a week, she typed back. Keep safe. Putting the phone down, Olivia examined her decreasing water reserves. Adequate, though she would need to practice restraint. The station's water filtration mechanism depended on solar panels, which had been operating poorly throughout the recent dust storms. Just one more difficulty inherent to desert fieldwork. As dusk approached, Olivia put together a basic meal of reconstituted stew, her thoughts still occupied with processing the satellite data. LF-17, the pride's alpha female, as Olivia had designated her, had displayed especially troubling conduct, coming within 2 kilometers of a tiny village the night before. If this lioness started attacking village livestock, retaliatory killings would almost inevitably follow. The gentle scraping noise seemed so slight that Olivia originally dismissed it as wind-blown debris striking the station's metal exterior. Yet when it recurred, clearer this instance, she halted, her fork suspended partway to her lips. The sound came from the western window, the one facing away from the vehicle path and toward the desert's immense emptiness. Olivia set her food aside and moved forward with caution. The research platform stood raised on supports specifically designed to keep wildlife at a distance. Occasionally jackals or hyenas would investigate the smell of humans, yet they seldom approached the structure itself. The scraping resumed, followed by something that sounded disturbingly similar to a whimper. Olivia's pulse accelerated as she grabbed for the powerful torch positioned beside the entrance. Darkness had fallen swiftly, as it perpetually did in the desert, and lacking exterior lighting, she could distinguish nothing beyond the window's reflection. Directing the torch beam outward, Olivia nearly dropped it in astonishment at what appeared. There, impossibly perched on the slim ledge outside her window, sat a lion cub. Probably no more than 4 months old, its tawny fur still marked by the disappearing spots of babyhood. Yet what captured Olivia's focus was the cub's physical state. Severe emaciation was evident, its small frame revealing protruding ribs and hip bones. One forepaw remained lifted awkwardly from the ledge, and even at this range, she could observe it was distended and likely wounded. "My God," she breathed, her thoughts scrambling to comprehend the situation. How had a lion cub managed to ascend to her elevated window? Where was its mother? Based on her latest tracking information, the closest pride should be at minimum 15 kilometers distant. The cub scraped feebly at the glass once more, releasing another pitiful mewing sound that appeared to circumvent Olivia's entire scientific training and strike directly at something more fundamental within her consciousness. It represented the universal expression of an infant in distress. Protocol dictated absolutely clear procedures in such circumstances. Reduce contact with wild creatures, especially susceptible young that might still remain under parental protection. Intervening with a lion cub could cause rejection by its pride, sentencing it to definite death, not to mention the very authentic danger that a protective mother could be close by, observing and waiting. Olivia stepped back from the glass, taking up her binoculars to examine the darkening terrain. No indication of adult lions, yet that signified little. Desert lions excelled at concealment, able to dissolve into the landscape even in bright daylight, let alone within the deepening darkness. The cub whimpered once more, a sound so forlorn it compressed Olivia's chest. She compelled herself to reason systematically. A cub this young and in such deteriorated condition, isolated at her window far from documented pride range. The most plausible explanation suggested abandonment or orphaning. When resources became scarce, desert lions sometimes made the difficult biological choice to desert weak or wounded cubs, giving precedence to the survival of more robust offspring or the mother's own existence. If accurate, the cub would perish absent intervention. Yet if its mother searched for it, as though responding to her unspoken inquiry, the cub released another cry, more intense this time, and started pawing more urgently at the glass. Within her torch beam, Olivia could observe its injured paw was bleeding, leaving smears across the surface. "I can't simply abandon you out there," she stated aloud, her choice solidifying even as the analytical portion of her intellect enumerated all the arguments why this represented an appalling notion. With deliberate gestures, Olivia unfastened the window. The desert evening air surged inward, bringing the fragrance of dust and the subtle wild scent of lion. The cub stared at her with amber eyes appearing too large for its hollow face, its tiny frame visibly quivering. "Easy now," she spoke gently, maintaining her motion slow and purposeful as she extended toward the cub with an extra research blanket positioned between them as protection. "I'm going to assist you." The cub recoiled at her approach yet made no effort to escape, probably too feeble for sudden movements. With extreme care, Olivia folded the blanket around the small creature and transported the cub through the window. It weighed significantly less than appropriate, another verification of its critical condition. Once inside, she rapidly secured and locked the window, then transported the wrapped cub to the examination table she used for gathering specimens from smaller desert animals. As she removed the blanket, the cub attempted neither flight nor hostility. Its gaze remained locked on her face with an intensity that unsettled her. Fear certainly existed there, yet also something appearing disturbingly like desperation, an awareness of its own vulnerability and desperate circumstances that seemed to transcend typical animal awareness. Beneath the harsh illumination of her work lamp, Olivia could completely evaluate the cub's state, and it surpassed her preliminary assessment. Beyond the obvious starvation and the wounded paw, which appeared to have been caught in some kind of trap or snare, the cub displayed indications of dehydration and likely infection. Lacking intervention, it would probably not endure the night. Setting aside the persistent voice of scientific procedure, Olivia gathered medical materials from the station's emergency kit. While she disinfected the hurt paw and administered antibiotic ointment, the cub stayed unnaturally still, occasionally twitching when she contacted especially sensitive areas. "You ought to be opposing me," Olivia whispered, unsettled by this atypical submission. Wild predators, even juveniles, generally reacted to handling with fear and hostility. This degree of compliance implied either severe exhaustion or prior human interaction, neither of which seemed logical for a desert lion cub in this isolated territory. After treating the injury and enclosing it in a light dressing, Olivia prepared a combination of rehydration solution and a modest quantity of protein powder, not suitable for a carnivore, yet the most suitable option she could present until she could acquire proper provisions. To her amazement, the cub eagerly consumed the mixture when she presented it in a shallow container. "You've encountered humans previously, haven't you?" she murmured gently, observing as the cub emptied the dish and gazed upward at her expectantly. That represents the sole reasonable explanation. Yet as Olivia constructed a temporary bed for the cub using extra blankets, positioning it in a protected corner of the research station, she couldn't dispel the sensation that additional dimensions existed to this situation beyond a simple deserted, human-habituated cub. Something concerning those perceptive eyes, the deliberate manner it had specifically sought her window. What Olivia couldn't possibly realize, as she finally returned to her own meal and the cub settled into exhausted sleep, was that her choice to aid this tiny being was about to thrust her into an enigma that would challenge everything she believed she comprehended about these desert hunters, and position her at the epicenter of a conflict that had been developing beneath the exterior of her research region far longer than she recognized. Olivia awakened with a jolt, momentarily confused in the pre-dawn dimness. Something had disrupted her rest, a noise not belonging among the recognizable creaks and murmurs of the research station. She remained motionless, listening carefully. Then it came again, a delicate whimpering from the corner where she had arranged the lion cub's bed. Switching on her headlamp, she discovered the cub conscious and agitated, its amber eyes reflecting the illumination as it pawed anxiously at the covers. Despite the care and fluids from the prior evening, the cub appeared deteriorated, its respiration shallow and accelerated, its slight frame quivering with what seemed like fever. "Infection establishing itself," Olivia murmured, extending for the medical kit. The antibiotics she had administered externally weren't sufficient. The cub required systemic treatment, yet her supplies were restricted, intended for human emergencies, not veterinary care. While she deliberated, the cub produced another sound, not the sorrowful mewing from before, but a more insistent vocalization Olivia recognized from her fieldwork observations. A contact call, the noise offspring used to find their mothers or other pride members when separated. "No one exists out there to listen to you, little one," Olivia spoke softly, readying a diluted quantity of broad-spectrum antibiotics. A gamble. The proper dosage for a lion cub wasn't something she had been educated to determine, yet without action, sepsis would likely develop within hours. After delivering the medicine and offering additional rehydration liquid, Olivia leaned back, studying the cub with mounting worry. Something about this circumstance felt progressively incorrect. Desert lion cubs weren't solitary. They remained beside their mothers for up to 2 years. Even if deserted due to injury or frailty, the cub ought to have been discovered nearer to pride territory, not kilometers distant at her remote research station. As initial morning light filtered through the windows, Olivia reached a conclusion. She needed to appropriately document this unusual encounter, both for her research and as security against possible allegations of wildlife interference. Taking up her camera, she started photographing the cub, capturing its state, the trap injury, and its overall malnourished condition. Through the viewfinder, something drew her attention. A minute unusual marking behind the cub's left ear. Magnifying, Olivia's breath caught in her throat. Not a natural marking, a miniature tattoo. 3 digits, 617, inscribed in black. "You're marked," she whispered, consequences rushing through her consciousness. The Desert Lion Conservation Project didn't employ tattoos. They utilized radio collars and microchips for the limited lions they monitored. This represented something entirely different, something indicating human involvement beyond casual contact. Extending for her satellite phone, Olivia contacted the one individual who might possess explanations. "Dr. Baker," responded a harsh voice following several rings. "Jan, this is Olivia Harlow. I require information about lion tattoos, specifically numerical marking systems." A pause. Context, Olivia. This exceeds standard research procedure. She outlined the circumstance briefly, characterizing the cub's state and the tattoo finding. The extended silence following was more alarming than any immediate response could have been. "Olivia, attend carefully," Dr. Baker eventually spoke, his tone lowered. "That cub constitutes evidence. The tattoo corresponds to the format employed by a breeding operation we've been monitoring for the past year. They're providing cubs to the exotic pet market and specific hunting establishments. Highly unlawful, obviously. Yet how did it reach my window? The nearest roadway is 20 kilometers away. Uncertain and concerning. Document everything and maintain vigilance. These individuals, they're hazardous. I'm dispatching a conservation team, yet the earliest they can arrive is tomorrow morning. Maintain discretion in the meantime. After concluding the call, Olivia sat in stunned quietness, digesting the ramifications. The exotic pet trade represented an expanding menace to wild lion communities, with cubs being seized for sale to private collectors who sought tame big cats as status symbols. Most perished during transit or from unsuitable care. Those surviving frequently ended up abandoned or eliminated once they reached maturity and became hazardous. Yet this cub's presence at her isolated research station couldn't be coincidence. Had it escaped during transportation? Been discarded when it grew ill or wounded? Neither explanation satisfied the persistent question of how it had located its way specifically to her window, kilometers from any transport path. The response came sooner than anticipated, and in a manifestation Olivia wasn't prepared for. As the morning warmth started accumulating, she was documenting the cub's vital signs when the satellite phone's emergency alert sounded. A notification from the automated boundary sensors she had installed to track wildlife activity around the station. Something substantial had activated the eastern sensor, approaching the station directly. Grabbing her binoculars, Olivia moved to the glass, examining the landscape. Heat distortion already rose from the desert floor, obscuring visibility, yet she could distinguish a dust plume approximately 1 kilometer distant, a vehicle approaching, and rapidly. Procedure for unexpected visitors mandated radio identity confirmation before permitting approach. Yet the vehicle wasn't decelerating at the standard checkpoint, and no radio communication had been attempted. Unease traveled up Olivia's spine. The research station's position wasn't confidential, yet it was sufficiently remote that casual visitors were non-existent. Anyone arriving here was either anticipated or had particular purpose. The satellite phone presented no signal, unusual, given its dependability. Somehow, the approaching vehicle coincided with a communication interruption. Coincidence seemed increasingly improbable. Moving rapidly, Olivia collected necessary provisions, water, emergency food, medical supplies, and the satellite phone, into her field pack. As an afterthought, she inserted her research notebook and camera containing the photographic proof of the tattooed cub. The vehicle now approached sufficiently near to identify. A durable off-road truck with darkened glass, the style used by tour operators and professional hunters. No research or conservation insignia visible. Decision time. The station provided security, yet also confinement if these were hostile visitors. The desert offered exposure, yet also escape paths she understood intimately from months of fieldwork. The cub made the determination for her, suddenly alert and growling gently toward the entrance, its small form taut with apparent recognition of danger. "It appears we're departing," Olivia murmured, cautiously wrapping the cub in a lightweight blanket and positioning it within her field pack, leaving the top unzipped for ventilation. A gamble. A panicked cub, even a weakened one, could inflict damage with its claws and teeth. Yet the option of leaving it behind appeared unconscionable given the circumstances. Slipping out through the station's rear service entrance, Olivia descended the stairs and immediately sought concealment among the sparse vegetation and rock formations dotting the landscape. Her field vehicle was positioned on the station's western side, too exposed to reach without detection by the approaching truck. Instead, she proceeded south toward a dry watercourse she had thoroughly charted during her research. It provided concealment, reasonably manageable walking terrain, and most importantly, a series of caves and overhangs that could offer shelter from both pursuit and the punishing noonday sun that would soon render travel perilous. The cub stayed remarkably composed within the backpack, as though recognizing the requirement for quiet. Olivia moved as rapidly as the landscape permitted, maintaining a low profile and utilizing natural elements for protection. Behind her, she perceived the arriving vehicle stop at the research station, followed by the noise of doors slamming and voices calling out. She couldn't distinguish the words, yet the tone communicated clearly enough, demanding, confrontational, not the demeanor of legitimate visitors or colleagues. For the following 2 hours, Olivia navigated the severe terrain with the concentrated accuracy her years of field research had cultivated. The dry riverbed offered some refuge from the progressively brutal sun, yet water represented a limited resource, and the additional burden and body heat of the cub was exacting its price. Discovering an appropriate overhang, she eventually paused to recuperate, cautiously removing the cub from the backpack. It was worryingly lethargic now, the combination of its wounds, illness, and the stress of transportation overwhelming its already weakened system. "Hold on, little one," Olivia murmured, providing water from her cupped hand, which the cub consumed weakly. "We simply need to persist until tomorrow when assistance arrives." While she examined the satellite phone once more for signal, a distant mechanical sound reverberated through the riverbed. Engines, several of them, dispersing in a search formation. The visitors weren't merely inspecting the research station. They were actively hunting for something, or someone. The cub's tattoo abruptly felt like a branding iron on Olivia's conscience. Whatever operation Dr. Baker had referenced, these individuals were evidently part of it, and the cub possessed sufficient value to justify an extensive recovery effort. Yet as the sun achieved its apex and the desert temperature reached hazardous levels, Olivia confronted an immediate threat more urgent than human trackers. Without sufficient shelter and additional water, neither she nor the cub would survive extended enough for the conservation team to discover them. The cub stirred in her lap, gazing upward at her with those disturbingly perceptive eyes. Then, to Olivia's amazement, it struggled upright and started limping deliberately toward the rear of the shallow cave created by the overhang. "What are you doing?" she breathed, following as the cub disappeared into darkness. What she uncovered there would challenge everything she believed she comprehended about desert lions, and initiate a sequence of events that would either guarantee their survival or determine their fate. Following the cub more deeply into the shadows, Olivia was compelled to stoop as the ceiling descended. The atmosphere turned noticeably cooler, a welcome relief from the punishing warmth outside. As her vision adjusted to the darkness, she understood they weren't within a small cave as she had initially assumed, but at the entry to a considerably larger system. "This isn't recorded on any of my maps," she murmured, switching on her headlamp to expose a slender corridor extending further into the rock face. The cub had halted several meters ahead, gazing backward at her expectantly. Despite its weakened state, it seemed to progress with direction, as though it understood exactly where it was heading. This conduct was so far outside standard lion-cub patterns that Olivia found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about these creatures. Proceeding cautiously, she followed the passage approximately 50 meters before it broadened into a chamber that stole her breath. The area was roughly circular, perhaps 15 meters across, with a modest opening in the ceiling permitting a column of sunlight to pierce the darkness. Yet what stunned Olivia wasn't the chamber itself. It was what adorned the walls. Ancient rock paintings, hundreds of them, distributed throughout the stone surface in faded ochre, white, and black pigments. Human shapes, animals, and abstract symbols formed depictions of hunting, ceremony, and ordinary existence, a prehistoric gallery appearing entirely undocumented and untouched by contemporary researchers. "My God," Olivia exhaled, momentarily disregarding the cub, the pursuers, everything except the archaeological treasure before her. Based on the style and arrangement, these paintings could be thousands of years old, a significant discovery that would excite researchers across numerous disciplines. Yet as she progressed further into the chamber, her headlamp exposed something that shifted her focus from prehistoric history to a considerably more immediate concern. In the distant corner, upon a natural stone shelf, rested a collection of modern objects, empty water containers, food wrappers, a first aid kit with Chinese labeling, and most disturbingly, a small metal enclosure sized for an animal approximately the dimensions of the lion cub. Someone has been utilizing this place, Olivia recognized, examining the items thoroughly without contacting them. The refuse wasn't aged, weeks rather than months or years, based on the lack of dust buildup and deterioration. The cub had positioned itself near the metal cage, observing Olivia with those unsettlingly intelligent eyes. When she approached, it retreated slightly, growling softly, the initial indication of typical wild behavior it had displayed since appearing at her window. "It's all right," she comforted, withdrawing to grant it space. "I'm not going to place you inside there." While she surveyed the chamber more completely, additional details emerged. Scuff marks on the dusty floor suggested consistent human traffic. A stack of vacant plastic containers bore faded shipping labels with partial addresses appearing to be in Abu Dhabi. And concealed behind a rock projection, nearly invisible unless you knew to search for it, rested a compact satellite communication device, the type employed by researchers and military personnel in remote locations. Components began arranging themselves in Olivia's thoughts. This wasn't merely a temporary concealment spot for wildlife traffickers. It was a way station, a location to retain captured animals before transport. The cave's position was perfect, naturally climate-regulated, hidden from aerial observation, yet reachable by those who understood its location. The cub's conduct abruptly made greater sense. It hadn't arbitrarily discovered Olivia's research station. It had fled from this holding facility, and lacking alternatives in the harsh desert, had sought the nearest human presence it could locate, someone who might assist rather than cage it again. Yet that raised another more troubling question. How had the cub recognized the difference? Before she could pursue this reasoning, the distant sound of engines intensified, then suddenly ceased. Voices echoed faintly from the passage's direction. Their pursuers had located the riverbed and were now methodically searching. Olivia extinguished her headlamp, plunging the chamber into semi-darkness broken only by the sunlight column from overhead. Her thoughts raced through alternatives. The corridor they had entered through represented the sole exit she had discovered thus far. If the pursuers knew about the cave system, which seemed probable given the evidence of their presence, she and the cub were effectively cornered. The satellite phone still displayed no signal. Not surprising, given they were now underground. The conservation team wouldn't arrive until morning, and even then they wouldn't understand where to search unless she could establish communication. The communications device she had discovered might function, yet attempting to utilize it would warn their pursuers to their presence if the traffickers were monitoring the frequency. As the voices approached nearer, Olivia made a desperate determination. Lifting the weakened cub, she withdrew to the darkest corner of the chamber, situating herself behind a substantial rock formation. Then she performed the last action anyone familiar with wildlife management would anticipate. She removed the provisional bandage from the cub's wounded paw and pressed gently on the injury. The cub released a piercing yell of agony that echoed throughout the chamber, a sound that would carry all the distance to the entrance. Then, comprehending her purpose with that uncanny intelligence, it persisted vocalizing, generating the impression of a distressed animal alone in the cave. Olivia's gamble rested on elementary human psychology. The traffickers desired the valuable cub alive and reasonably uninjured. If they believed it was isolated in the cave, they might reduce their guard, offering her an opportunity to observe them and potentially collect additional proof. Her hypothesis proved accurate. Within minutes, 2 males entered the chamber, conversing rapidly in Arabic. With her restricted comprehension of the language, Olivia could only capture fragments, something regarding a shipment timeline and replacement expenses. They carried powerful torches yet no visible weapons, suggesting confidence in their remote location rather than carelessness. While they explored the chamber, summoning the cub with counterfeit soothing tones, Olivia carefully withdrew her phone and switched it to camera mode. From her concealed position, she managed to capture distinct images of both men as they crossed through the sunlight column, along with video of them discussing what appeared to be trafficking activities. The cub continued its commendable performance, remaining hidden while vocalizing sufficiently to keep the men searching. When they started approaching Olivia's hiding spot, the cub abruptly fell silent, then began calling from the opposite side of the chamber, a diversionary tactic so refined it sent chills down Olivia's spine. This is impossible, she thought, observing as the men redirected their search. No wild creature should be capable of this degree of deception and coordination with a human, unless it wasn't entirely wild. The realization struck her with stunning clarity. The tattoo, the unusual conduct, the apparent comprehension of human intentions, this wasn't simply a captured wild cub. It had been born in captivity, part of a breeding program, and had experienced sufficient human interaction to develop cognitive capabilities seldom observed in wild specimens. Its escape hadn't been luck, it had been planned. The men's frustration increased as their search continued without achievement. One positioned a call on a satellite phone similar to Olivia's, speaking tersely before disconnecting. "They're bringing additional personnel," he informed his associate in accented English. "The supervisor wants the cub located before nightfall." Excessive investment at stake. This fresh intelligence added urgency to Olivia's circumstance. Additional searchers would render escape progressively improbable. She needed to act while only two of them existed. The satellite communication device she had uncovered earlier now represented her optimal alternative. If she could activate it and transmit a distress signal with her coordinates, the conservation team might arrive sooner, or at minimum understand where to search if she and the cub were no longer present. With the men temporarily concentrating on the passage extending deeper into the cave system, Olivia seized her chance. Maintaining the shadows, she moved toward the concealed device, the cub trailing silently behind her. The unit was older yet functional, its battery indicator displaying partial charge. With practiced effectiveness, she energized it and entered the emergency frequency employed by conservation operations throughout the region. Then, maintaining her voice barely above a whisper, she transmitted their location and circumstance. "This is Dr. Olivia Harlow. Wildlife trafficking operation discovered at coordinates 19.432, 13.876. Minimum 2 armed suspects. I possess evidence, including a tattooed lion cub. Dispatch immediate assistance." The response was instantaneous and unforeseen. Not from the conservation team, but from a familiar voice. "Olivia, this is January. We've been attempting to reach you. Remain where you are. Namibian anti-poaching unit is already en route to your position. Estimated arrival 20 minutes. We've been monitoring this cell since yesterday." The surge of relief proved temporary. One of the traffickers shouted from across the chamber, they had spotted her. As they rushed toward her position, Olivia seized the cub and fled for the passage they had originally entered through, hoping to reach the exterior and locate shelter before her pursuers could capture them. What occurred next would be documented in numerous witness statements, scientific publications, and eventually a groundbreaking study on lion cognition and behavior. As Olivia emerged from the cave into the harsh afternoon sunlight, she discovered herself confronting a third trafficker who had been positioned outside. He seized her arm, causing her to drop the satellite device, which shattered upon the rocks. The cub tumbled from her hold, landing awkwardly on its injured paw. The man produced a knife, his intentions unmistakable, yet before he could act, a sound reverberated through the riverbed. A roar so commanding it seemed to shake the very atmosphere. Upon the ridge above them stood a lioness, her tawny coat gleaming in the sunlight. Behind her, barely discernible in the heat haze, materialized the shapes of additional lions. An entire pride positioned strategically around the vicinity. The trafficker froze, his knife still extended. In that instant of uncertainty, the lioness propelled herself down the slope with terrifying speed and accuracy. She didn't attack, not immediately. Instead, she positioned herself between Olivia and the threat, her massive form creating a living barrier. The cub limped toward the lioness, emitting the contact call Olivia had heard earlier. The response was immediate, a rumbling vocalization containing unmistakable recognition. "She's its mother," Olivia realized with wonder. "She discovered us." The trafficker, confronted by an enraged lioness, committed the deadly error of lunging with his blade. The assault that followed was swift and conclusive. Minutes later, when the other two men emerged from the cave, they discovered themselves encircled by the pride. Their fate was equally swift. When the anti-poaching unit arrived, they encountered an unusual arrangement. Olivia seated composedly at the cave entrance, documenting with her camera as the lioness carefully transported her cub to a shaded area where the remainder of the pride had assembled. The remains of the traffickers rested where they had fallen, a graphic testament to the repercussions of their deeds. The investigation that followed disclosed the complete magnitude of the operation. The cave system had functioned as a collection depot for wildlife harvested throughout the region, not merely lions, but leopards, cheetahs, and uncommon desert elephants. The tattoos constituted components of a tracking system for purchasers who desired particular animals with documented ancestry. Most remarkably, DNA analysis verified what Olivia had already hypothesized. The cub and the lioness were indeed mother and offspring, separated when the cub was captured weeks earlier. Contrary to all probability and natural behavioral patterns, the mother had tracked her young across kilometers of desert, eventually following it to Olivia's research station and subsequently to the cave. The scientific implications were significant. The coordination between mother and cub suggested levels of communication and spatial memory previously undocumented in lions. The apparent cooperation with a human, Olivia, challenged fundamental assumptions regarding these predators' cognitive capabilities. 6 months later, Olivia stood at a different window. This one overlooking a specialized enclosure at the Namibian Wildlife Sanctuary. Within, the cub, now considerably larger and healthier, played alongside 2 others rescued from the identical trafficking network. The mother lioness observed from a neighboring rock, her alert eyes routinely monitoring for potential threats despite the sanctuary's security. They would never return to the wilderness. The habituation to humans, particularly in the cub's case, rendered release excessively hazardous for both the animals and local communities. Yet they would live out their existence in a specialized facility, contributing to research that would assist in protecting their wild relatives. As though sensing Olivia's presence, the lioness raised her head, golden eyes locating the window with uncanny precision. No uncertainty existed regarding the recognition within that gaze, a connection forged in the crucible of survival and unforeseen alliance. "Still watching over me," Olivia murmured. In response, the lioness produced a soft chuffing sound, the identical vocalization Olivia had first heard from the cub at her window on that fateful evening when a desperate mother had dispatched her offspring to the one human who might assist them,